Gambia is witnessing its biggest anti-government protests in more than 15 years. A crackdown against the opposition and a suspicious death of an activist have sparked anger. So as Gambians head to the polls later this year, we ask, what's causing the unrest? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dedine Abugeda. It's rare for Gambians to take to the streets and show their disapproval of the government. President Yahya Jammeh has ruled the small West African nation for more than 20 years. He's a leader known to be intolerant of dissent. But his government's reaction to a rally held a week ago has outraged Gambians. Dozens of opposition activists were arrested. One of them, Solo Sandeng, he's the secretary of the opposition United Democratic Party, is thought to have been killed while in police custody. These exclusive pictures obtained by Al Jazeera show security forces rounding up protesters. It happened in the suburbs of the capital Banjul on Saturday. Now, after the death of Sandeng, the leader of the opposition party, Osaino Darbo, was also arrested. His current location isn't known, but it's thought he's being held at Gambia's notorious Mile 2 prison. Before we bring in our guests, Al Jazeera's Nicholas Hack reports from the Senegalese-Gambian border.
The protest took place just 30 kilometers down this road across the Senegal-Gambia border. Few have managed to report inside the Gambia. Such is the level of control of information the state holds. Now, despite what international organizations describe as gross human rights violations, such as the stifling of freedom of speech, arbitrary detention and torture by security forces of the Gambia, Gambian opposition activists are determined to get their voices heard and continue their protest movement. They're protesting for electoral reform ahead of the presidential elections expected to take place December 1st. Now, this is the fifth elections taking place since Yahya Jammeh came to power back in 1994, 23 years ago. The United Nations has condemned these arrests and have asked Gambia to release all opposition activists. Gambia says those protests were illegal. Today, protesters will appear in court, and Gambians will be keeping a close watch to see who among the opposition leaders appearing in court are missing. Nicholas Hawk, Inside Story, Karang, at the Senegal-Gambia border.
Well, Gambia's information minister has said that he had no clue if the detained opposition protesters had died in custody or where others were being detained, but asserted the demonstrations were illegal. Sheriff Bojang told the AFP news agency, "This is Gambia. We have rules and laws governing us, and one of the laws states that before you embark on such a thing, you must seek and obtain a permit from the police, and that wasn't done in this case, and they were dispersed and detained." Gambia is one of Africa's smallest countries, known as a popular tourist destination that attracts thousands of visitors to its Atlantic coastline resorts. And unlike some of its West African neighbors, it's been relatively stable politically. Stability, though, has not translated into prosperity. Nearly half of Gambia's population lives in poverty. Let's now get the thoughts of our guests. Joining me here in the studio in Doha is Alieu Manjang. He's a PhD candidate at Qatar University. Over in Dakar via Skype, Sharif Bojang Jr. He's a journalist and a blogger. Welcome to both of you to Inside Story. Alieu, why are the protests happening now in Gambia?
Thank you very much. I think we have to reflect back to 1990. When the current regime came to place. In that particular moment, President Yahya Jammeh made a lot of promises. Part of that promise is to take a route and leave reform of the government and bring in people who are believed to be involved in the, economic crimes to justice, and also to restore the stolen public money. And now I think Gambians are using that promise to assess the performance of the current regime, which I think is not in line with that promise.
But what is it you think that started these protests? I mean, these promises you speak of were made more than 2 decades ago by the president. So why is this happening now?
I mean, a lot of factors are responsible for these protests, and they act together and they build up the anger and the frustration of the Gambian people about the regime. Part of this is the economic structure of the country. Gambia is a tax-based country, and in recent years we have seen increment in taxes that didn't go in parallel with increment in salaries, and also alleged government involvement in the business, as well as discouragement of foreign direct investment that has been a very important part of Gambian economy, as well as decentralization policy, which discourage agricultural development, which is the backbone of Gambian's economy. Also, build up the economic malfunctioning in the Gambia, and that's demonstrated and reflected in the anger and the frustration of people. But I think there are also immediate factors that are also responsible for this part of it. The recent border closure between Gambia and Senegal. Gambians are much dependent on the re-export of goods and commodities from Senegal. Part of this building materials and also like crude oil, and people, there is report of lack of electricity recently. These are all factors that have built the frustration of Gambia against the regime. And I think oppositions, know the situation. They try to exploit that momentum, and they took into the streets and in a bid to win the acceptance and the confidence of people.
Sharif Bojang Jr., speaking of the opposition, we have seen this reportedly massive crackdown on the opposition in Gambia, and there are reports that senior opposition members have been arrested. And we were just reporting also that there have been reports of the death of one of the opposition members, Solo Sandang. What will the opposition do next?
Well, I'm not sure I think it's a waiting game for now. The opposition leader, as you know, Ousainou Darboe, is in custody. Several other of his executive members are in custody. Some other people are in custody. These are just ordinary members of the opposition United Democratic Party. And this report that some people, that at least one person died in custody as a result of torture and brutality from the security forces. I think this leaves a lot of, anger, a lot of doubt, a lot of frustration. And unless the government produce these people who are said to have died in prison, I think it's going to, whatever happens, whether there is a court case or whatever, the government stand will create more questions than answers. And to add to what my compatriots have just said about some of the reasons that propelled this protest by the opposition, I agree with him on these points. It has gone back. But then I want to stress
what will be the
fact that,
consequences of this crackdown on the opposition?
Well, the consequences is that I think it is more of what the Gambia has to win from this than the consequences, because I don't think it can get worse than that as far as the government is concerned. We've seen on Thursday when these protesters the first protesters, when they took to the streets. It's a peaceful protest, and the police used force, heavy-handedness to clamp down on them, using batons to beat people up. And then this is as a result of that, we've been having reports of deaths. On Saturday, we've seen a different tone. The opposition leader led the protesters, his party members. We didn't see the police doing the same thing, for example, beating the opposition leader. They had their buttons, but they didn't do that, because I think finally they've come to the realization that Gambians are up, and they are up to protest for their rights. You cannot take them for granted. If you use buttons and guns and stuff to suppress people against, just protesting peacefully and calling for not even a regime change, but for electoral reforms, some more people are going to go, but I think are going to the street to protest. So I think the lesson learned from this for now is that you cannot suppress the rights of the people and expect them to go down on the ground for you. It's no longer going to happen.
Let me ask you about the reports that we've been mentioning, Sharif, about Solo Sandang, the secretary of the opposition party. Apparently reports saying that he's been tortured to death while in detention, and Amnesty International saying that, in fact, according to information that it's received. Do you see any process of accountability playing out here?
Well, I'm not sure of that because in consideration of the fact that in the past we have issues like this, April 10, 11, 2000, the last time we had such mass protests, citizen protests in the streets of Banjul and its environs, people died. They were not accounted for. The government failed to own up to its responsibility. We've had the disappearance of a journalist and then the government failed to take its responsibility. Another journalist murdered, the government failed to take responsibility. So the big issue here, first of all, is that we need to verify 100% that Solo Sandeng had died in prison. If that is confirmed, then we come to the next stage, and that is what is the government going to say about this? But I can assure that this issue, this time, things will be different because he was arrested. In the past, especially in the case of a missing journalist, the government said they had no idea of it. They're not responsible for the arrest of this journalist. But then this time, Solo Sandeng was arrested in public, in broad daylight. There are video footages of it. So the government cannot claim that it is not responsible for his arrest, in contrast to what the information minister had said.
What the information minister was saying, Sharif and Alieu, is that he has no clue if the detained opposition protesters had died in custody or where others were being detained. He's also saying that the demonstrations were illegal. Does he have a point, Alieu?
Well, the situation in Gambia is tense at the moment. For sure, the minister would talk in the interest of the government. And definitely we have conflicting reports about the number of people arrested and whether, in fact, Solo Sandeng is dead in the custody, because what government is saying is contrary to what is being propagated by other online newspapers in the Gambia and abroad. So at this moment, we have to see...
How difficult is it to get information out of Gambia?
Well, I think in recent years we have been seeing a crackdown on the journalists, both local and international media. People are not, international media have rare access to information in the Gambia, but I think now that's no longer an issue there because we have lots of online radios in diaspora. More than 10 or 11 radio, and they have access to Gambia through the assigned, informal journalists who provide them with information. And also now we have seen kind of proliferation in number of satellite dishes which Gambians have in their possession, and they are able also to connect to like external or through Senegal media, which are also very much in extensive coverage of what is happening in Gambia, because the border is fluid and it's very easier for them to go and have what they want without being intercepted by the government.
Sharif, for you as a journalist, is it difficult to verify information coming out of the country?
It is very difficult to verify any information from the Gambia because what is happening is in order to verify information from the people on the ground, they themselves need to be informed first. But the Gambia, there's no independent journalism. People who attempt, including, of course, the information minister, who is also the owner of the Standard newspaper. When the last time he was very critical of the Gambian government, his newspaper was shut down, was closed a few times, at least twice, for being, for being independent, for being tough. So, this is a very difficult situation. People are there, those journalists who try to tell the truth, to report as it is, they are shut down. So what we are having in this situation, once again, throughout this incident, is that we have our families in the Gambia and they were relying on us. Isn't it ironic? Outside the Gambia, my friends, my families, my colleagues, everybody rely on me outside the Gambia to tell them what is happening in the Gambia because there is no free flow of information. The government has shut down all sources of information. And if you want to permit me, I want to elaborate on your question to Alieu on the question of the information minister not being aware of it. I mean, here is a government minister, the spokesperson of the government, who's been coming out all these days to speak on behalf of the government, to react to allegations and assumptions and everything. But when the question came to you that, are you aware that Solo Sandeng, was arrested in the first place, I was expecting the answer would be yes or no. But I mean, there was a lot of hesitation, and that goes to show the kind of government we have in place. If you don't even prepare your spokesperson to tell the world what is happening, and he is in the dark the same way everybody is, I don't think that is a government that we want to continue in the Gambia.
Well, speaking of the government, there are upcoming elections, Alieu, later this year, and there is the point of view. Some are saying that this particular case of Sendeng highlights the fact that the government will perhaps be intensifying its crackdown on opposition, on any independent voices ahead of those elections in December. Do you agree with that? Do you think that is going to happen?
No, I think government will be cautious about what it will be doing next after what we have seen in recent days. As I told you, a lot of factors are playing here, because if you look at the situation in Gambia, the popularity of the regime is declining and severely. And one part of this is because of some of his foreign policy approach. We have seen recently, in recent years, Gambia has been withdrawn from Commonwealth. And also, Gambia is developing antagonizing relations with Senegal. For a few months ago, like last year, in late 2015, the president was talking, sarcastically about Senegalese previous president, and this is something that has, contributed negatively in the popularity of the government. Also, talking about the popularity, we have to also understand the effect of illegal migration on the government regime, because the fact that Gambians are going outside in mass, it means that there is something wrong with the government inside. So all this government is aware of this, and in order to tame the tension of people, I think it will be more cautious now to deal with any potential demonstration, because people are in a position, to go against the regime at the moment.
Sharif, do you agree with that? Do you think the government is going to be more cautious ahead of the elections?
Yeah, for this, I beg to disagree with Alieu on the fact that for the government to be cautious ahead of the election and during election, we can only base it on an assumption, thinking that things will be different. But I want to say that there is no physical evidence and historical evidence whatsoever to show that President Jammeh and his regime will change, their tone or even the way they deal with the opposition and dissenters and critics. We've seen over and over and over these things happening. And then I want to stress the fact that in the midst of all these, protests, arrests, allegations of torture and deaths, when the president arrived from Istanbul in Banjul, a few days ago, and this question was put to him, all of at random, he said, and I quote, "The Gambia's national security will not be left in the hands of dogs." He didn't mention the opposition, but he has always been calling the opposition, especially the main opposition, United Democratic Party, as dogs. So you're not even sensitive to what is happening in the country, and you still mention this dog thing. And that shows the kind of government we have in place. And there is no evidence to show that, the treatment of the opposition and the way he deals with the opposition and critics will be different.
Alieu, what is the role of ECOWAS here? And I ask you about ECOWAS because in 2011, the last elections that took place in Gambia, ECOWAS refused to send a team to the country, saying that there was intimidation of the opposition and of the electorate. So with these upcoming elections, what should the role be for ECOWAS?
Well, what I know is that Gambia's relations with ECOWAS is not in good terms. When you remember that President Jammeh was refused to lead the regional bloc when there was a summit in Abidjan. I can't remember the year. And also, the president was against consensus when the members talk about presidential limit. Gambia was one of the countries who refused that. And just recently, we have seen ECOWAS delegation being to Gambia to discuss the border issue. So we can see that there's kind of frustration with the development in Gambia, in political, domestically and externally from the side of ECOWAS. I would not be surprised if they didn't come. So if they don't come come to supervise the next year election. But I think they are watching closely what is happening in Gambia at the moment in concomitant with what also other regional and international organizations are doing, because we have heard from the Ban Ki-moon and other human rights organizations talking about the development in the Gambia. And I think without ECOWAS is not exempted from these development. So definitely they are following the development to see whether they will be on the ground to supervise the election is a question that has to be answered now.
And Sharif, for the European Union, which has traditionally been Gambia's biggest donor of foreign aid. Now, we know that in 2014, the EU did cut off 13 million euros that it was giving to the country, saying at the time they attributed that decision to the lack of progress on human rights issues and the human rights concerns they had when it came to Gambia. So how effective, though, is this policy, or has this policy been, of holding up aid to try and sway the government to improve their human rights records?
Well, once again, we can expect that it will hit the government. The fact that the EU can take this stand to push the Gambia to be more tolerant, especially to its critics and opponents, to allow free speech, free assembly, and to allow people to exercise their rights. The EU, as you said, is one of the Gambia's development partners, biggest development partners, has always been one of the Gambia's development partners. And the fact that the EU can withdraw some money that I mean, there's a huge amount of money to Gambia, and as far as the quest to develop the Gambia is concerned, as the president has been trumpeting all these years. So this is a big setback for us, the fact that the European Union can withhold money that they supposed to go into a lot of projects in the Gambia. But let's also bear in mind that it's going to hit the Gambia if the EU, come up with much stronger, other than the press releases and condemnations on papers and online and all those things. If the EU decide to go further than that, it will hit the Gambia. But I'm not sure that it is going to hit the Gambia at such a magnitude that it is going to force, President Jammeh to even make major changes in the Gambia, for example, because he said this a few days ago when he came to the country from Istanbul, where he went, in Turkey, where he went to attend the Organization of Islamic conference, meeting there. And then he said, he boasted that the Gambia throughout his tenure, the biggest donors and partners turned their back on the Gambia. He made reference to that, and he said the Gambia has been developing and it's been surviving, and thanks to other partners. For example, we've seen recently he swayed diplomatic relations from Taiwan to China. And of course, it's about money. And the announcement that the next OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, will be held in the Gambia. And he talked about money, the wealth of these people, the wealth of the Arab world, and stuff. And he is expecting that will be a bumper harvest for the Gambia as far as money and, and finances are concerned. So it will, the EU condemnation, the EU action, further action, any action the EU will take will hit the Gambia, but I don't know. I'm not sure it will hit it to the magnitude of Jammeh making major policy changes in the country.
Do you agree with that, Alieu? And what needs to be done for these policy changes to take place in Gambia that the people request? Well,
I echo him when he talked about the foreign policy shift. We have seen that in the Gambian foreign policy pattern, the president has been propagating these anti-imperialist, and that also forced Gambia to ally with anti-Western regimes like Libya, Iran in the Ahmadiyyan time, and also Venezuela, Cuba. But then, for some reason, Gambia have diplomatic relations with most of these countries, and now trying to look for alternative partners. And part of it now we have seen Gambia has developed relations with Russia and also with China. So I think what Mr. Boja is saying that is quite true. I mean, and Gambia is trying to expand its foreign relations, but in order to secure resources that has been cut from Gambia by other Western partners due to the what is being perceived as lack of good governance in Gambia. So I think that's true. But what the government should do now in order to tempt the situation also has to do trying to reach out to the nation and understand and make them understand what is happening on the ground. I think it's no longer workable to cut information from people because they have alternative sources of information. And I think taking that from against Gambia is going to be detrimental to the government.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much to my guests, Alieu Manjang and Sharif Bojang Jr. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for watching the program. You can always see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. You can also have a further discussion by going to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha. Bye-bye for now.